r/NoSleep. Posted by u/mrcenterofdauniverse. Miles to midnight. I don't know why I took the detour that night. The main road was clear, and it wasn't even that late, but something in me veered off onto that quiet stretch of asphalt winding through the empty fields. The GPS had gone silent miles back, as if it recognized this place as outside of its jurisdiction. The road was smooth, too smooth. My tires barely hummed against the pavement, making everything feel eerily still. The only sound was the soft rush of wind against the car, but even that seemed muted, like it was passing through some invisible barrier before it reached me. There were no streetlights, just the soft blue wash of my headlights stretching out into the void. The world beyond the road was swallowed by darkness. I could almost hear the silence pressing in from all sides. It was the kind of quiet that clings to your skin, makes you want to breathe louder just to make sure you still exist. "Miles, it's not too late to turn around," my boss's voice rang in my head, low and coaxing. I hated how he spoke to me, like I was a performance dog he was training. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, remembering the way he'd brush his hand over mine in meetings, lingering just long enough to make his intentions clear. The raise had been worth it, I'd told myself. Just a few months of playing along, and it wasn't like I was seeing anybody else, or anybody else was looking for me. It wasn't his fault. Maybe he, too, was blue, starving for a warm touch. But even as I thought it, a cold knot of disgust curled in my stomach. The first sign that something was wrong came when I noticed the road seemed to stretch forever. I'd been driving for what felt like hours, the dashboard clock stuck on 9:47 p.m., the same minute it had been when I first took the turn. I tried switching radio stations, but all I got was static, the kind that hisses and whispers just on the edge of comprehension. I was the only car out there, alone in the headlights' glow, and I began to notice the air had a taste, dry, metallic, like blood. It caught in my throat, made me swallow hard. My mouth felt like I'd licked dust from an old book. A strange tingling crept up my spine, spreading out to the tips of my fingers, like the air itself was alive, watching. "Everything all right, Miles? You're awfully quiet," he'd asked earlier that day, leaning in too close, his breath hot against my ear. I could still feel the shiver that ran through me, but it wasn't just from his presence. It was the monotony, the suffocating dullness of my life, of the choices I'd made. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. It was just a flicker, a shadow darting through the trees that lined the road, or maybe it was just my imagination trying to fill the emptiness. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, the leather warm and slightly tacky under my fingers, like skin that's been left in the sun too long. The smell hit me next, faint at first, then overwhelming. It was a mix of damp earth, rotting wood, and something sharp, almost like burnt sugar. I rolled up the windows, but the scent only grew stronger, as if it was seeping out from the car itself. A flash of movement caught my eye again, closer this time, right at the edge of the headlights. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. My breath was shallow, chest tight. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. There was nothing there. Just the empty road and the silent trees. But then, a shape started to form in the shadows, tall, thin, more like an outline than anything solid. It stood motionless, just beyond the reach of my headlights, almost blending in with the night. "Are you ignoring me, Miles? You're not drifting away, are you?" I could almost hear my boss's voice slithering into my thoughts, the smugness in it crawling under my skin. My pulse roared in my ears as I stared at the shadow, unable to move. The figure didn't advance, didn't retreat. It was as if it was waiting, suspended in the space between seconds, just as trapped as I was. Then something strange happened. The world around me blurred, twisted, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. My body felt heavy, distant, and the air grew even thicker, wrapping around me like a wet blanket. I tried to blink, to shake off the disorienting sensation, but my eyelids wouldn't respond. Panic surged through me as I realized I wasn't just seeing the figure, I was becoming it. My thoughts fragmented, scattered like dead leaves in a storm as a strange, alien consciousness seeped into my mind, cold and probing. I could feel the rough bark of the trees, the dampness of the earth beneath my feet that were no longer mine. The night air was sharp, filled with the scent of scorched sugar, and I tasted the charred sweetness that filled this place, savoring it like it was life itself. The headlights of the car were a distant glow, something I knew I should remember, but the thought slipped away as my focus shifted to the car, to the prey inside it, me. I tried to scream, to claw my way back, but the more I fought, the more I could feel myself slipping into the creature's mind, drowning in its hunger. My vision flickered between two worlds, my hands gripping the steering wheel, the creature's fingers digging into the earth. The night felt alive, pulsating with a rhythm that wasn't human, a rhythm that was pulling me deeper into its beat. "Miles, come back to me," a voice, not my boss's, but something darkly nostalgic, echoed in my mind, almost comforting in its coldness. I felt my consciousness fray, the boundary between us thinning until it was almost gone. But then, in a flash of desperate clarity, I remembered the car, the steering wheel slick with sweat beneath my fingers. I was still there, somewhere inside that body. With every ounce of will I had left, I jerked the wheel, slamming my foot down on the gas. The engine roared to life, and the car shot forward, the tires screeching as they gripped the road. For a terrifying second, I felt the creature's mind rip free from mine, a cold, searing pain that left me gasping. My vision snapped back to my own perspective just as the car plowed into the figure. There was a sickening crunch, a flash of darkness, and then I was back in my body, the wheel trembling under my hands, my heart thudding against my ribs. The headlights illuminated nothing but an empty road, the shadowy figure gone as if it had never existed. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. My breath came in ragged gasps, the taste of metal and char still clinging to my tongue. The clock on the dashboard clicked over to 9:48 p.m., and the world around me was normal again. The road ahead was just a road, stretching off into the night, and the trees were just trees, unmoving and indifferent. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. My skin still tingled, the memory of that otherworldly presence lingering at the edges of my mind. I drove on, faster than before, desperate to leave that place behind. "Everything all right, Miles?" I could almost hear his voice again. But it wasn't from memory. It was real, in the backseat, smug and possessive. The air in the car grew colder, the metallic taste stronger. I tightened my grip on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to glance in the rearview mirror where I knew I'd see his shadow. The clock on the dashboard flickered. 9:47 p.m. It's been 9:47 p.m. for hours. Next story of this video. Posted by u/mrcenterofdauniverse. A life in ruins. Death was a crying woman dressed in a black gown, waving at me from a distance. She stood in the cold, vacant lot where my home used to be, her silhouette stark against the darkening sky. I could not escape her gaze, the way she beckoned me with her sorrowful eyes, whispering promises of an end that was as inevitable as it was terrifying. The news hit me with the force of a sledgehammer: terminal illness. The doctor's office, with its antiseptic smell and sterile white walls, became a suffocating box. I heard the words but couldn't grasp their meaning. Terminal. I had spent my life working in the medical field, helping others fend off their mortality, only to find my own life slipping away uncontrollably. Facing death, I was also forced to confront a lifelong fear: public speaking. My significant work in medical research had earned me an award, but the idea of standing in front of a crowd filled me with dread. The award ceremony loomed like a specter, and I spent countless nights rehearsing my speech, fighting the panic that rose every time I imagined the event. Amidst this turmoil, life offered a fragile gift. My sister gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Reuniting with my family after a long separation because of the baby's birth was like stepping into a sanctuary. We celebrated the baby's milestone and relished the time spent together. Laughter, stories, and the warmth of shared meals filled the house, offering a temporary reprieve. Holding my niece for the first time, I felt a bittersweet joy. Her tiny fingers grasped mine, and I marveled at the miracle of new life, even as my own was fading. My family gathered to welcome the new addition, and for a brief moment, the weight of my diagnosis lifted as I was enveloped in their love and excitement. This moment was as breathtaking and stunning as a timeless portrait. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, we all gathered for dinner. The meal was perfect, a tapestry of rich flavors and textures, shared with great company. It felt like a day where everything went right, effortlessly enjoyable. We were caught in a moment of pure joy and connection, savoring each bite and every laugh. Then, without warning, the earthquake struck. The ground beneath us convulsed violently, a monstrous force rising from the depths of the earth. The house shuddered as if gripped by an unseen giant, walls buckling and floors splitting open. Panic erupted as the world around us transformed into a maelstrom of destruction. The air was thick with dust, and the sounds of destruction were deafening. The floor rippled like a wave, throwing me against the dining table. The chandelier above us swung wildly, glass shattering and raining down in glittering shards. The air filled with a cacophony of screams, the deep, guttural groans of the earth splitting open, and the thunderous crashes of collapsing walls. A massive beam from the ceiling crashed down, striking me across the back and pinning me to the ground. Pain exploded through my body, white-hot and blinding. I gasped for breath, the air thick with dust and the acrid smell of ruptured gas lines. Each inhalation felt like drawing in shards of glass, the dust coating my throat and lungs, choking me. Darkness enveloped me as the power failed, plunging the world into a void of terror and uncertainty. The only illumination came from the occasional flash of sparking wires, casting eerie, fleeting shadows across the wreckage. It was a nightmarish symphony of collapsing walls, shattering windows, and the desperate cries of my family. My sister's voice, high-pitched and terrified, calling out for her baby, was a piercing wail that cut through the chaos. Each cry sent a dagger of fear into my heart, but I was powerless to move, trapped under the debris. Minutes stretched unforgivingly. Relentless aftershocks followed, each one reigniting the terror, each one a fresh assault on the senses. My body ached, pinned under the heavy beam and debris piling on top of me, my muscles screaming in agony with every attempt to move. My vision blurred, a dark fog creeping in from the edges of my consciousness. The cries of my family grew fainter, drowned out by the persistent roar of destruction. It felt as if life was being squeezed from my body. Hours passed, though they felt like an eternity. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind a haze of pain and fear. The world around me was a chaotic symphony of destruction, turning eerily silent. The acrid smell of smoke began to permeate the air. The crackling sound of fire reached my ears, the heat intensifying as flames consumed what was left of the building. The fire crept closer, the heat searing my skin, the smoke choking me. Breathing made me cough, the air thick with ash and the scent of burning wood and flesh. I could hear the distant sounds of rescue teams, their voices muffled and indistinct. I screamed for help, my voice raw and ragged, but there was no response. The weight of the debris pressed down on me, a crushing force. I was trapped in a coffin of concrete and wood, the flames drawing closer, the heat unbearable. My mind teetered on the edge of insanity. Hallucinations plagued me, visions of my family standing unharmed, their faces serene and smiling, while the world burned around us. I saw my sister holding her baby, their bodies whole and unbroken, even as the fire consumed them. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, my mind fracturing under the strain. Starvation and dehydration gnawed at me as I kept hearing rescuers who couldn't hear me or see me. I begged them to save me and my family. My body screamed for sustenance, my mouth dry, my stomach a hollow pit of pain. Maybe days passed, I couldn't tell. The relentless hunger and thirst sapped my strength, leaving me a fragile shell, barely clinging to life. The fear of being buried alive gnawed at me, a primal terror that sent waves of panic coursing through my body. I clawed at the debris with bloody, broken fingers, each movement a Sisyphean task. My nails cracked and bled, the skin on my hands torn and raw. Every inch of progress was a victory. I could hear the fire being kept alive in the dry weather as it crawled closer, the heat oppressive. The fire roared, a living entity, hungry and ruthless. In a moment of clarity, my life flashed before my eyes, a rapid montage of my mother's hugs, my father's cooking, my brothers running around and shouting, my sister smiling at me and her newborn lying clothed with the scent of fresh human life. I saw my family, my friends, the moments of joy and sorrow that had shaped my existence. I felt a strange sense of peace, a resignation to my fate. Summoning the last of my strength, I pulled my arms through the debris, scraping layers of skin off. I dug through every piece of rock and wood, pushing it as far away as I could, forming an opening to escape through. I grasped the rough edges with white knuckles, pulling myself out from under the beam and through the tiny hole. I breathed heavily and let out primal screams as my body scraped against sharp materials. I managed to pull myself out, covered in dust and blood, emerging into a world transformed by terror. The day was buzzing with a slow wind, crackling fire and search teams calling out discordantly, the once vibrant neighborhood reduced to a landscape of rubble and fire. All peace and vibrancy were now a scene of bloody devastation. I stumbled through the ruins, my body weak, my mind numb. The sight that greeted me was one of unspeakable horror, and the air was thick with the scent of death, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the acrid smoke. I found my sister first. Her body was twisted at an unnatural angle, her eyes wide open, staring sightlessly at the sky. Her face was a mask of dread, frozen in the final moments of her life. Her baby lay beside her, a tiny, fragile body crushed under the weight of the debris. The sight of them, so small and vulnerable, felt like strings inside me snapping. The rest of my family was scattered throughout the ruins, their bodies mangled and broken. My parents, My brothers, reduced to lifeless husks. The house, once a home, had become a tomb. The walls that had witnessed our precious lives were now stained with thick red and ash. The world around me was a nightmare of twisted metal and shattered concrete. The ground was slick with blood. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled over the debris. I tripped and fell beside my father's body. His eyes were empty pockets, staring vacantly into the void. My sight flooded with images of his gentle, assertive presence. His hands, which had held mine when I was a child, were now cold and still. I reached out to touch him, my fingers trembling. The contact was a jolt of reality. Sobs racked my body, my dried-out cries merging with the distant sounds of sirens and the crackling of the flames that still consumed parts of the wreckage. I clung to my father's body, the warmth of my tears mingling with the coldness of his skin. The world around me dissolved into a puddle of what it had once been. Hours later, I was found by rescuers. Their voices were a distant hum, their hands gentle but firm as they lifted me from the rubble. I was a shell of a person, both body and mind shattered. They wrapped me in a blanket, their touch a small comfort against the vast ocean of my grief. In the days that followed, I was surrounded by other survivors. Their presence was a lifeline, a thread that kept me tethered to reality. We shared our pain through mutual tears and silence, our stories of loss and survival, finding solace in each other's company. But the trauma was a recurring nightmare, a pop-up book narrating the same horror over and over. Nightmares plagued my sleep, the images of my family's broken bodies haunting me. I would wake up drenched in sweat, feeling as though I was still buried alive under the debris. I was a prisoner of my mind, tormented by visions of the earthquake, terrors, and death. When I returned to my apartment across the country, I kept my terminal illness a secret from those around me who didn't already know, unwilling to add to their burden. More selfishly, I couldn't bear to deal with their reactions. Enough was enough. My body grew weaker, the disease sapping my strength even as I fought to rebuild my life. The hallucinations were relentless, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. I had stopped working months before the earthquake, which allowed me some room to breathe, but the grief and illness were a constant shadow. Despite everything, I had to come to terms with the award ceremony as it went ahead. I stood before the crowd, my body frail, my mind a storm of memories. The recognition of my work felt bittersweet, the applause a hollow victory against the backdrop of so much loss. They would never know, which made them blessed, and it made me angry. How could I stand there pretending in front of their happy faces and shiny prizes when there were gaping holes in the earth the size of families? The ceremony was a blur, the faces of the audience a sea of indistinct shapes. I delivered my speech, forcing every word out like a dry mouth attempting to spit. In the chaos, an old professor, a mentor who had been with me through my hospital visits since my family couldn't drive all the way to my city, waved at me from the front row. I sat down next to him. He took full days out of his week to spend with me afterwards, inviting me to homemade dinners every night, treating me like his child, and allowing me to feel everything without judgment in exchange for my sheer company. I didn't understand it, but his kindness was a balm for my wounds, and his presence the sunrise after a long night. With what little time I had left, I decided to buy a home that he could take over when I was gone. This detail was only disclosed in my last testament. It was a beautiful, safe place with an attended garden and enormous windows looking out over the light blue sea, a refuge where I could be cared for by nurses. The quiet of my new home provided a space that I filled with memories of my family, their photographs and mementos, clinging onto what I had left of them. I welcomed a pet into my life, a small, resilient creature that brought me unexpected joy. As I watched the orange tabby play with its own shadow, I felt a wave of purpose. What I needed most was the confidence to chase life, not death, no matter how close it felt. The tabby's playful antics were a source of comfort, a reminder that I was, at the end of the day, still alive, and I was still alive, and I was still alive, and I was still alive. In the end, my life was a tapestry of horror and beauty, of loss and love. Death may be a crying woman in a black gown waving at me from a distance, but I would face her another day. And as I held my cat, feeling its small heartbeat against my hand, I realized that even as these days dwindled, this little life would carry on.